So what are some thoughts or comments that you might have about any of these? Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes.
This is uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I'm done. And so, thinking completely about content is king, right? In my time, it's always, I'm never getting through what I wanted to get through. And so getting to the place where I even allow myself to pull back from that, to think about all of these things is really tough. We were talking about when we do go beyond one is because of that individual student that we have a conversation, maybe supportive services or the Arc Center, like got us clued in on something and said, oh, we're thinking different on this one. It's like, oh, look, we can do that. But it's not holistic across my whole class. It's for that student in that situation. And then the next day I go back in and I try to plow through another 7 chapters.
That is so honest. No, I appreciate. How many of you feel like that is a shared experience? You're not alone. I think that here's some pieces that I want to just share with regards to that. Is that, again, as we go back and think about the visual, the students that we are all serving now are very different than the students of 20 years ago, right? And so the question becomes, in particular with our most disproportionately impacted students, which are the majority of our students, the idea is coming into the institution is a traumatic experience. And so if you have students who are first generation students, for example, and they're coming in and they're trying to figure out how to navigate that institution. I had an intern who was working in the equity office last year. She said she's first time she'd ever been on a college campus was when she got to De Anza. She came with her mom and they finally figured out how to get parking and then got to the campus and her mom's like, I think we should go back and try next year because they had no clue where to go or what to do. So she then stopped someone walking by and said, where are you going? Can I follow you? But my thing is, and I said to her, that's amazing. The agency that took to be like, where are you going? I'm gonna follow you, right? Versus, I'm out. Because she didn't even know what building to begin with. And so you think about the journey that it takes just to find your way, that student, to a class. So if you're constantly in a slight traumatic space, it means you're constantly dealing with a low level of fight or flight or freeze. And in fact, if you're in that space, as many of our students are, they're not even able to access the logic and reasoning side part of their brain. They're just surviving because they don't feel safe in the classroom. Not by anything you're necessarily doing or not doing, but there are things we can intentionally do to create a trauma-informed classroom that allows for them to take in 7 chapters. But first we have to create the conditions for that to happen. And so that becomes the question. How can you create the conditions that allow you, that is gonna require you to maybe move a little more slowly at the beginning of the semester so that you can move more quickly towards the end? This is about helping students figure out how to navigate this system. And that becomes a question of, and I often ask folks, whether you're classified professionals, whether you're faculty, if you're in relationship with a student, to be able to ask and say, what does success look like for you? What would you need out of this experience? And I can remember, because I was a Freeway Flyer part-time faculty for years before I joined the faculty at De Anza. And I remember doing this when I was teaching at night with my students. And one of the students was a returning student, and she said, I have been a stay-at-home mom for years now, and I'm wanting to come back to school, and no one in my family is supporting me, because they think what's gonna happen when I'm gone. And so I don't need to get an A in this class, I just need to be here every single week to train up my family. She's like, so if I get a D+, I'm good. And I said, ooh, can we do like a C minus? Like, can we negotiate? Right, but it wasn't about me, it was about her. And in fact, she pulled off a strong C, and the next semester she came back to me and she said, I'm doing all A's and B's, I'm doing great, and my family supports me. Because that's what she needed. Versus what I need you to do is get A's in my class. And so I had to start asking all my students, what do you need in this class at this moment to feel and be successful so that I can help you get there? Because otherwise, I'm defining what their success is going to look like. And we may not be on the same page. And I think another piece of equitizing the classroom means that we actually have to co-create in real time some of what we're going to do. So one of the most, this to me is, and I'm an equity radical, so some of you might be like, okay, she just lost me on this one, but just stay with me. It's very challenging when we are required, and we are doing equity work in an inequitable system. So there are lots of limits to what we can do. I get that. I live it every day, I understand it. But when we are asked by the system that says the syllabus needs to be decided when? Before or after you meet your students? Yes. Now think about a coach. Are there any coaches in the house? Yes. Do you start preparing your plays or figuring out what's going to happen on the field or where on the court before you meet your team? Usually not. Right? The idea, I grew up in a sporting family, my dad was a coach, and he would never decide on all the plays and what we're going to do before he met the players and figured out their strengths. Right? He's not going to coach to last year's team with this year's group of folks. Does that make sense? And yet we are asked to figure out everything and what is going to be the best way to deliver that content before we've even met the students. This is really problematic. Because there's a lot we can do in a syllabus and still in real time better democratize our class so we can co-create it with them. So one thing that I do is at the beginning of the quarter for all my classes, I have them do a little short learning styles assessment because I want to figure out who my learners are in my classroom. If the majority of my class, because what kind of learning styles are valued and advantaged in higher ed? Yes, another way of thinking about that, if we're thinking about Kolb's learning styles, would be abstract conceptual learners. In fact, all of you have definitely mastered it if you're working in academia. That's why you're sitting right now listening to me lecture, even if you've written like 15 lists and 2 memos in your head. You know how to do the do. Right? You know how to do that. You learn how to do that. That is who we value. And we also say that we're very student-centered, but then we teach perhaps in facilities that don't center students. I have a whole tool that's about equitizing visual space. I can send it to you. You can do equity walks as teams, and you can start to look visually at the space. Who is centered? In this space, if you were teaching a class, who is centered? That's right. Who has the most power in the room? That's right. So it's very hard to make the case that this is a student-centered classroom when every bit of power is situated right here, right? And so that's not about this campus, that's every campus. So I'm not picking on MPC. But the equity walk brings that forward so that we can start to then discuss what are strategies in a space like this to better equitize the space, to recenter and ground students. And this is true even with the syllabus. Like if I know that I have the majority of my class are active experimenters, what am I going to do so I can make sure that I am meeting them where they are? I had one class where I did this self-assessment, and the class broke out across active experimenters, reflective observers, and abstract conceptual learners. You don't have to do this. It was a horrifying semester. It was very difficult. But I offered 3 different types of assessments, and people could opt in based on their learning styles. So many folks chose multiple choice. I'm like, really? I would never choose multiple choice. I'm like, please, just give me a multiple choice. And then there were folks who wanted to do oral presentations, and then there were some who wanted to do essay exams. They are all going to assess the same learning outcome. But it's important, especially when we're talking about our most disproportionately impacted students, who then may be experiencing stereotype threat, to understand in this class, I want for you to walk away understanding the content. It's not an evaluation of your ability to take a test. And so we have to be able to navigate all of that in real time. And so it isn't easy. And yet it does sometimes mean we have to look at the content and say, do I need to cover the last 100 years of mathematical or historical concept, I don't know, whatever you might be teaching? Or can they get this much and still, and if they get it really deeply, that's going to serve them better than just having this kind of survey experience of which they memorize and then forget promptly and move on to the next class. We have to start to ask those questions, which I'm guessing many of you are already doing. But if we do it in community with an eye towards equity, then we're doing it in a very different way that also has implications for the larger system. Because then we can start to ask for different things. Right? How do I democratize a classroom? Maybe we should talk to our professional development office, because we've never had a chance to talk about that. How do we equitize a curriculum? How do we equitize a syllabus? Oh, well, you know what? Now that we're talking about it, it would be great to have some coaching around that. Right? That as you're in community doing this work, you can start to ask different questions of the institution. And that would be my hope for you. Right? That could be a place to begin. In this PowerPoint, and I'll make sure you get it, there is a list of small, low risk, medium, and large or high risk equity actions that you can begin to take. And you can opt in based on where you think you are already in your journey. And so I'll give you 2 examples in closing, because I'm sure that this room is filled with success stories, and my hope is that you get a chance to share with each other the great, wonderful work you're doing and what's been successful, both from the classified professional perspective, part-time, full-time, administration, wherever you are. And I have this as a handout. I'll make sure to send you wherever, I'll send you the materials. So one thing that we started doing at De Anza is that we had a lot of our trans-identified students, genderqueer students, gender non-conforming students, who were constantly being misgendered or were not having folks that they were engaging with across the campus honoring their preferred pronoun. And so the question became, how could I start to create, not calling people out, but creating a calling in kind of movement? And so there were different strategies I used, but one was that on my signature, I started to include my pronouns and asking everybody to do the same. Asking senior staff to do it, asking academic senate to do it, classified senate. I'd started an equity core team program at my campus, so there were equity core team folks all over. They all started doing it, and it just kind of created this wave. And there were folks who were like, did the memo go out? What's happening? Why is this on the email? Are we gonna get in trouble if we don't put it there? But then it gave us an opportunity to talk about it. Like, why would we need to include pronouns? And then started just gently encouraging people, you know, when you're in a meeting, whether it's a staff meeting, division meeting, classroom, just as you're introducing yourself, start including your pronouns. Let's start doing that. So, my name's Veronica, and my pronoun is she, her, herself. Started passing out name badges at all the workshops that said my name is and my pronoun is, and people could write it in. We started handing out buttons. Started this slow, positive, affirmative invitation in to awareness campaign about the importance of pronouns. And to see that kind of spread like what, you know, to just spread across the campus in this positive, informative way was really powerful. A small action with huge implications. One other strategy I want to share was one of our biologists. His name is Jeff Shinsky. He's absolutely amazing, and I encourage you to check out his research. And again, free. He didn't have funding to do this, but he was very involved in the equity work we were doing. And he was trying to think of a small initiative in his class, because it's often really hard in the STEM areas. And so he came up with this small initiative. that had huge implications in his class. And so what he did is he called it a diversity spotlight, and it took away no curriculum time, but students would go online and they would read about, just maybe see a YouTube or a TED Talk or a little short article about a scientist outside the canon. And they would then have an opportunity to get to know someone's story and perspective. One of them, I remember him sharing the story, it was a trans-identified man who was in the sciences and had made some great discovery. And in his article, he was talking about that discovery and how he was presenting it at a conference, and how some of the colleagues came up to him after the presentation and said, "You are such a better presenter than your sister." And just talking about the kind of sexism and transphobia he experienced. So they're drawn in because they're learning about this scientific discovery, right? And empirical data and all this good stuff, and at the same time being exposed to this person's experience as a trans-identified man. And so these were the kinds of people that were being spotlighted in this diversity spotlight. What he found was that everybody in the class did better. Everyone in the class did better. And he eliminated his achievement gaps. So everybody's grades went up. Not just his disproportionately impacted students, who were white identified males, mind you, and Latinas in his class. So he knew his data, and everyone ended up doing better. And folks who had never seen themselves as being connected to the sciences now started to see themselves. And so he's showing us this profound data. And here was this small intervention, absolutely free, took no curriculum time away, that was having these huge outcomes in his class. So it's possible. And there are so many things that we can do across the system. And so I'm encouraging you to go away with hope, to start being in conversation with each other, thinking about where you can start to lean in more intentionally through an action with your colleagues, maybe something that you choose to do differently as a classified professional. What is that going to be this year as you begin? What can you take on as a small, medium, or large action to help the institution move closer to equity? And also to keep having conversations, or to start having conversations. So thank you so much.
I know we're going over time, but I know what it's like to be in the audience and have a pressing question. So can we just take like 4 minutes to do questions? Anthony, is that okay with you? Great. And then if you have other questions that you'd like to continue longer conversations, please show up to the breakout sessions with Dr. Neal.
Any questions?
Thank you. Have you heard of Reading Apprenticeship, which helps create a tremendous amount of equity in classrooms? I got to go to a conference once and encourage those professors who have lecture forums or subject matter to look into Reading Apprenticeship as a way to create equity in the classrooms.
I'm going to do my best to try and articulate this, but it's in regard to a question about your diagram on the board with the 4 circles. So I know currently right now, as you know, with Kathleen's comment about the chaos that's happening here, and I know that there's an emptying part that happens on that 3rd box there. And so for me at this point, knowing that there's some emptying going on right now, even if there's an emptying, how do you work past, let me see, how do I say this? So right now, currently we're going through negotiations and things like pay raise and things. So even if we fight to get that, but feel like that doesn't measure or doesn't equate to the trust and the mending of the relationship, how do you get to that point? Because I know for me, even through this whole process, like it's like you said, it's about the students. And so I know for the TRIO faculty, every year we sign something that says the campus can say they don't want us anymore, don't want to fund us, so we're never going to be tenured, never have the security, but we still stay because of the work that we want to do. And so even if we empty and we get what we want, how do we work through if we feel like even if we get that, it doesn't work towards mending the relationship, mending the trust, mending the type of relationship that's going to get us to a true community.
And I think, unfortunately, although there are strategies and there are tools and lots of things that I can share, I can't in 5 minutes. That's the bummer. But that is one of the things that I'm going to be talking about in the calling in session. And what I would also recommend, if you're thinking, well, where do I begin right now? It's REINA, it's REINA. There's 2 books and a whole institute on trust in organizations. And I go to that resource quite a bit and talk a lot about how do we start to actually mend authentically trust. I mean, one thing that's really difficult in the scenario that you're describing is that there has to be an institutional commitment first to the TRIO program. I don't know what the backstory is around because you were, no, what was it?
Not really true, but the faculty in general, in regards to the papers, but I would just say more in regards to, I say, regardless of if I'm gonna have a job next year, regardless of something, because of the students, and we wanna be here for the students.
Yes.
But also, if the things that we're fighting for in regards to overall faculty, pay raises, and things like that, are met, the relationship, it still doesn't measure up to the relationship of feeling valued and trusted.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. So yes, because I think that there's 2 pieces. Like first I would want to look at what's the institutional dynamic that's happening that's producing some of that tension, and can that be mitigated? Because when there's action that's seen in the institutional structure, that can sometimes resolve some of the issues on the other end. Because what can happen is that if an institutional policy or practice is being reinforced, then oftentimes it becomes the person who's having to do the enforcing that becomes like the enemy, becomes the problem, right? And this is often why I see so much tension between maybe administrators or deans, and because they're having to enforce a policy that maybe they themselves don't even think is equitable, but they're stuck in that quandary. And so now it becomes an interpersonal dynamic and battle versus we collectively looking at the institution thinking, can we do this better? Can we do this differently? And so I think there are different ways in which we have to look at the scenario and say, what's really going on here? Is this an interpersonal dynamic, or is this an institutional dynamic that we can remedy that allows for some opening to then rebuild a relationship? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's much more complex, and yet I want you to know that there are strategies. If this is something that you really feel that you're, as a campus, or there's enough folks across the campus feeling locked in this pseudo to community chaos cycle, I would say that that's an important place to have some investment, either with growing your own practitioners or thinking about bringing in someone to mediate or facilitate that process, because it takes time. And it isn't something that one workshop, kind of a one and done. So, but I'm happy to share resources and whatever I can do to support you. It's a really great question, and I don't want you to lose hope in that. Yeah.
Veronica, thank you. I think Veronica's been a big spark for us, and I have to just say, in sitting here, I feel like I'm having 2 conversations in my head at once. One about student equity, and the other seemingly maybe about participatory governance and communication on campus for some of us. I think we can continue those conversations. I hope they don't take 1,000 years. But one thing we could do is next Flex, perhaps have a book club on courageous conversations. Is that perhaps a good book? Unless somebody comes up with another one. So go get your copy of Courageous Conversations, and let's make a commitment to come back and start work on some of that. My other thought is, in terms of student equity, you mentioned having an equity walk across the campus or through your syllabus. I know that we now have a new subcommittee of Senate called Students First. Suzanne Musala and Anita Johnson, I know, are big involved in that, and some of the rest of you have been attending those meetings. They've done a lot of good work in our catalog. So an equity walk through our catalog, I think, would be good for me. Along the lines of what Kevin said, I need to go back and have an equity walk with other biologists through my curriculum. And I think it might be interesting to take some time next Flex to have an equity walk through whatever your specialty is. So something to think about. Okay. Veronica, thank you so much.